In the last 2 weeks, which is interesting timing, Goldman Sachs has released a detailed 44-page deep dive on the US nicotine market, which is obviously hugely relevant to the public health community. So, Derek, can you please comment on this paper and what it actually says about the future of the US nicotine market?
Well, I think first the pedigree of this is incredibly important. This comes from Bonnie Herzog, one of the best analysts in the investment world. And we must remember that it was Bonnie a decade ago, when she was at Wells Fargo, made the prediction that within a decade, um, non-combustible cigarettes and the growing non-combustible category would exceed the revenue of the products in the combustible market. So it was the start of e-cigarettes, it was the start of heated tobacco, and she said that this eventually would be the winner. Well, in this report, 10 years later, she confirms that by the end of 2025, the revenue from non-combustible, that includes all of the vapes, heated tobacco, snus, nicotine pouches, the revenue will exceed that of combustible cigarettes in the USA. A huge milestone, and almost kind of difficult to imagine that we now are here. The profits will lag, the profit win will lag, and it'll take a few more years given the pricing of the products. But that big message shows that we're at this incredible transition point where the use of nicotine is going to be dominantly coming from lower risk products and less from combustible products. The health consequences will follow pretty dramatically. And remember, it comes at a time when we're seeing the smoking and vaping rates of young people at the lowest level in decades of recording, and the smoking rates among adults also coming down very steeply, all coming down in sync with the increased use of nicotine products, suggesting people are opting to switch, maintain a certain level of nicotine, but the moment they switch, they will start to probably reduce their substance health risk. She then looks in great detail at which companies are doing better than others and so on. And we don't have to go into that, but I think the dominance of PMI can't be missed from the report, given that they are now the number one in two categories worldwide: heated tobacco products, where they have both IQOS and Illumina coming to the US pretty fast, and in the pouch market with Zyn becoming really almost a cultural product. Read the New Yorker over the last few weeks. Are we seeing nicotine pouches taking over? My reading of this is that it makes a couple of points. First, she was right. She was able to look into the future a decade ago, which is very rare for an analyst to get it so right. And I think what she understood, because she comes from a consumer insights world across all consumer products, not just tobacco, she could understand what was happening in the consumer market, the desire for healthier products, the desire to continue to get nicotine, but in a form that wouldn't kill you. And that played out. He also was able to see that the execution, the business execution that PMI followed methodically over years, um, has played out quite well. My hope, though, looking into the future, is that we start seeing the same happening in low middle income countries. Um, and remember that the US is 4% of the world's smoking population, 96% live outside the US. I would love her to project, when are we going to start seeing 50% of all the nicotine products uh, being safe, reduced risk products in countries like China and Indonesia and Jordan, and Egypt, where we have smoking rates 30, 40, 50%. Um, the, 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 the hints are that it is coming in many countries. And we already know that in many places like Japan, Sweden, UK, even Pakistan, the uptake of a range of tobacco harm reduction is accelerating. And I just hope that we'll start seeing a global report before long showing when we're going to hit that 50% mark and continue going down. Remember that what makes it also interesting is that her report comes despite incredible pressure from NGOs, from Bloomberg funded initiatives, to scare people about the downside of nicotine on the brain, nicotine causing terrible lung problems, vapes causing a range of conditions that they don't cause, and really the fear of kids getting into these terrible trouble, which they are not. Despite all that, we are seeing this progress. Imagine what would happen if you have a government who said, we want to improve the health of a population. Let's get behind this. Let's embrace this technology, which we now know from the FDA has been through very rigorous scientific testing. Let's make it available widely, even more widely available, not just in the US, but around the world. We could achieve those long-term goals of reducing smoking much more dramatically.
Yes, and I have a question about the regulatory challenges because the analysis actually highlights how the very slow FDA PMTA process and the prevalence of the illicit e-vapor products are actually hindering this transition to reduced risk alternatives. So the progress has happened in spite of all of these challenges. And in your view, what specific regulatory reforms are needed to create a viable market for legal, lower risk nicotine products for the US?
Well, it obviously starts and ends with the FDA. We have had a number of people, including recently Matt Homan, giving his recommendations, having been inside FDA and now outside, about what common sense approaches needed to be followed. Clearly, you've got to enforce the laws that you have on the books, which are not being enforced. Secondly, you've got to speed up the authorization. Thirdly, you've got to think more deeply about why do you need to go through such an elaborate process when these products don't differ very much from each other? Can you not set basic standards and get a far more wide variety of products onto the market? That's from the regulatory point of view. I think the industry, particularly the vaping industry, can and should be doing substantially more. And I think it serves their interests to clean their act up substantially. And I always think back to 10 years ago when the toy industry was accused uh, of Chinese manufacturers exporting lead-laden toys into the US market. And there was a great fear that this was going to lead to the end of the toys being imported from China, unless they cleaned their act up. And what happened was that the leading toy manufacturers in the US, led by Hasbro, the toy associations of China and the UK, got together and said, we need to clamp down on our members, make sure that we test our products properly, and only allow products that meet the standards to get into the US on a voluntary basis, knowing that the competition between companies is often more effective than waiting for the regulators to act. And I think the same applies here. It's long overdue that the trade associations, both the Chinese and the American, got together and said, let's, for example, make sure that we don't allow any manufacturer of a vape that is using contaminants or illegal products or advertising or marketing to be displayed in any of our expos around the world, unless they meet approved standards, which we in industry set. And they would probably be as good or even better than what governments would eventually set. That pressure could have an impact very rapidly. Remember that the lead in toys thing went away almost overnight once they did this. And the same was then applied to infant formula and cleaning up the Infant Formula Act coming out of China, and then more recently into the food and nutritional supplements. So we can't just expect the FDA to get on and do everything they should, which hopefully they will, but they're unlikely to. Let's see the industry take far more severe voluntary action against its members who are non-compliant with what the trade associations believe is reasonable compliance.